Good day, everyone, and welcome to another poetry recording with English with Joshua. This is poem number 3 on the prescribed poetry list for the grade 12 English home language. The title of the poem is At a Funeral by Dennis Brutus. Brutus was born in Salisbury, Southern Rhodesia, better known as Zimbabwe in this day, on 28 November 1924, to South African parents. His parents moved back to their home in Port Elizabeth when he was aged 4. He was a graduate at the University of Fort Hare. He taught English and Afrikaans at several high schools in South Africa after 1948. But was eventually dismissed for his vocal criticism of apartheid. Brutus was a co-founder of the South African Non-Racial Olympic Committee, SANROC, an organization that was heavily influential in the banning of the apartheid-era South Africa from the Olympics. He left South Africa for the UK in the 1960s and taught there at various universities. In 1961, he was banned for his political activities as part of SANROC. While in Zimbabwe, he was arrested and returned to South Africa where, while trying to escape, he was shot. After recovering from the wound, Brutus was sent to Robben Island for 16 months. The historical context of the poem. Written during apartheid and shortly after the death of the newly qualified Dr. Valencia, this poem criticizes oppression. It can be seen as a call to arms, as a way of saying to people that they should not surrender to the oppressive powers. It's also about the frustration of aborted hopes. Here in this poem, we see that Valencia died before she could work as a doctor. She had recently graduated. Her family had made enormous sacrifices to get her through medical school. And we see that through this poem, all of that hard work was all in vain. She did not get the opportunity to practice as a doctor. The poem is a tribute to Valencia Majombozi. It is about her funeral ceremony. The speaker presents the funeral as an occasion to renew his commitment to the struggle for liberation. He does this by comparing the burial to those people whose lives are being smothered by the oppression. Oppressed people cannot live their lives fully. He urges active resistance. He finally states that death is a better fate than yielding to defeat and death. At a funeral, in brackets you can see that it is written for Valencia Majombozi, who died shortly after qualifying as a doctor. The poem reads, black, green, and gold at sunset, pageantry, and stubbed graves, expectant of eternity. In brides white, nuns white veils, the nurses gush their bounty of red wine cloaks, frothing the bugled Durgin slopes. Salute, then ponder all his hollow panoply, for one whose gifts the mud devours with our hopes. Oh, all you frustrate ones, powers tombed in dirt, aborted, not by death, but by carrion books of birth. Arise, the brassy shout of freedom stirs our earth. Not death, but death's head, tyranny, skies our ground and plots our narrow cells of pain, defeat, and death. Better that we should die than that we should lie down. As we look upon the structure of the poem, there are 2 equal stanzas and a special rhyme scheme. A, B, A, B, C, 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 D, C, D in this poem. The formality of the poem mirrors the formal rites and rituals of a funeral ceremony. If you are finding the English with Joshua videos helpful, please remember to like, share, and subscribe so that we may continue to reach many other grade 12 learners. At a funeral for Valencia Majombozi, who died shortly after qualifying as a doctor. These words read were the words of Dennis Brutus. He had an interview with William E. Thompson. It reads, "Usually my poems don't have titles because I hope that the poem works sufficiently well that it doesn't need a kind of signpost to it. In this case, the poem At a Funeral needed a title because I don't think you could have guessed otherwise what it was all about. Also, I don't think it needs some explanation." We see here that the word a creates an impersonal tone. This creates a contrast with the dedication. Funeral. We know that the poet was part of the struggle against apartheid. Thus, we can expect that the poem is going to be about the death of a black person. It's about a young woman called Valencia Majombozi, an African woman who managed to qualify as a doctor after enormous hardship and sacrifice by her parents. Her mother took in washing and ironing, did the cleaning of apartment buildings, and put her through university. She got her medical degree, and then, by an incredible irony, just after Valencia had completed her internship, she died. "I went to her funeral," Dennis Brutus says. The poem is about the years of sacrifice that end in nothing, and you could read the poem entirely on that level, as just an expression of frustrated and aborted hopes. When he dedicates it for Valencia Majombozi, the poem then becomes personal. We see here that it speaks of a specific person, and that gives a different or a greater effect on the reader. Black, green, and gold at sunset, pageantry, and stubbed graves expectant of eternity. Black, green, and gold. The poem is also operating on a political level, and I'll touch on a few of those things, Brutus says. The resistance movement in South Africa had its own flag and opposed one to the state's flag. The resistance movement's flag was black, green, and gold. The choice of those colors at the beginning of the poem is not an accident. Also, many of the colleagues of this doctor attended her funeral wearing their university robes. These were black caps and gowns, but often with a gold hood indicating an arts degree, green indicating a science degree, so again, you have a combination of black, green, and gold. But here, because we spoke about the opposition's colors, we see that these three colors represent the ANC colors. So we do expect the poem to be about political protests. So not only is it personal, but it's also a political poem. At sunset, sunset refers to the end of the day, which is also symbolic of death. So it creates a somber mood. It also has connotations of darkness and sadness. Pageantry. The flag is part of a ceremonial display, a formal ceremony with symbolic clothing and rituals. This creates the impression that it is just for show, because all of that does not matter now, as all the hopes and dreams are lost with her death. Stubble is the stalks of crop left sticking out after a harvest, or the remains of a person's beard left after they have shaved their face. This implies that the graves were in a state of neglect and they looked untidy or unkempt, as they were covered with dead grass stalks. This is a metaphor. The gravestones then looked like short grass on these graves. Graves expectant of eternity. This is a personification. The graves are waiting for bodies who will be buried and stay there forever. So we see here that all hope and life are gone. The grave is also portrayed as being hungry for the bodies, as death is inevitable. This emphasizes that we all have to die. Eternity here can be ambiguous. Either death will remain in the graves for an eternity, or the belief that the afterlife will not end. In bride's white, or nun's white, nurses from the hospitals attended the funeral. In South Africa, the nurses wore cloaks lined with bright red. Other nurses at the funeral wore white, which echo the nun in their habits. The old-fashioned nurses' outfit was a white dress with a short white veil and a red cloak. The connotation of brides and nuns implies innocence. Veils. These cover the faces. The nurses wear them with their white uniforms. Gush is to flow out fast. With their bounty is something given in a generous amount. They're showing their grief or gushing out their grief. So they're showing their grief in abundance. The nurses in their red cloaks and white dresses look like frothing red wine surrounded at a graveyard, because to froth is to bubble over. So we see that a lot of them showed up for this funeral. The bugle dirging slopes. And away back behind the hill in the ceremony on the edge of the ghetto, there's a Boy Scout with a trumpet blowing the last post. The bugled dirging. The bugled dirging is the name of that song. It's a funeral song, usually played on a bugle. It suggests that this was a military funeral. So we see that someone here was playing the bugle. The slopes around the graveyard can also be seen as a personification, as though the land itself is mourning the young doctor. Salute means to honor something or someone, or literally salute the dead, as one would salute a soldier. You see with the exclamation mark here that there's also a defiant tone. It emphasizes that this is a command. To ponder is to think about something deeply. This is also an instruction that seems to be given here by the speaker. He encourages the reader to look further than the display, the flowers and all of the sad music and all these other things that come along with the funeral ceremony. All this hollow. Hollow could literally mean something that is empty, not sincere or meaningless. Panoply is a splendid display. So the speaker asks the reader to contemplate the implications of this funeral and death in general. He encourages the reader to look further than the display, that being the funeral flowers, all the people that were there, the sad music and all of that, which lacks some sort of sincerity. One refers to Valencia Majombozi. Gifts refers to her ability as a doctor to heal and bring comfort to others. Devours is to eat greedily, hungrily, or quickly. This has a negative connotation, as earth seems to be hostile. The personification emphasizes that all her hopes and those of her people are now buried in the earth. So we see here a tone of despair or sadness. Oh, all you frustrate ones, powers tombed in dirt. The poet uses apostrophe. Apostrophe is a figure of speech in poetry where non-human things are addressed. So he uses this apostrophe as he addresses the dead directly. He's talking about all the people who are frustrated with their oppressive lives. Frustrate is to prevent the success of something or to cause irritation and anger by preventing things from happening. The dead are described as powers tombed in dirt and as frustrate. It's a verb, not frustrated, that being an adjective, because they are powerful enough to cause frustration to the government rather than them being passively frustrated. So they have the ability to frustrate this apartheid government. Powers tombed in dirt. All the hopes and dreams of these people are now in the ground because they're dead. They cannot dream and live out their hopes anymore. Instead, their dreams are aborted. Aborted, their lives are basically cut short. Not by death, but by carrion books. So the abortion is the deliberate ending of a pregnancy or by killing an unborn fetus. The dead are described as being aborted or killed before they could live, not by death, but by carrion books or by books of life, a reference or an allusion to a dompas or a pass book. It's an extremely negative and oppressive connotation. Death here is written in a capital letter. That is important as we see that death is being personified. That has the ability to abort these lives. But carrion books of birth. This is a metaphor. Their lives are death-like due to oppression. They are dead not because they died, but because their freedom was taken away by the pass books. Arise. The brassy shout of freedom stirs our earth. The dead are addressed directly and told to rebel or to rise against the government. Literally, they're told to stand up, but also a reference to rise up, which means stand or start a revolution. This is another command, and this also gives off a defiant tone. Brassy means to be confident and aggressive in a loud way. So people are angry, they want freedom. Or music performed on a brass instrument like a bugle or a trumpet. So we see here that the speaker asked them to arise, be confident or be aggressive as they shout freedom. Freedom is capitalized to show that it is important, as it is personified as shouting to wake the dead. Describing freedom's shout as brassy refers to the bugle in line 4, which was used to play the dirge or the last post. Here, music does not send the dead to their rest, but awakens them. Stirs our earth. This means to get the idea that earth is waking up from these people now arising very confidently, shouting and asking for freedom. Stirs the earth, it wakes the people up in their call to arms. People want to stand up together and fight for their freedom. Not death, but death's head tyranny skies our ground. It's helpful to know the symbol of death's head tyranny. I saw a film in South Africa called Judgment and Nuremberg. It begins with the tanks rolling through the streets of Berlin with the Panzer divisions whose insignia was a skull of crossbones. The death's head being wildly cheered by the audience. The Nazis are regarded as great heroes by the South African regime and people imitate them. The Nazis are the model for how one should behave if you are white in South Africa. That, again, is from the interview that the poet sat through. When we speak of the word death, we see here that it is personified as the grim reaper with his scythe. A scythe is a harvesting tool used to harvest or collect the dead. The poet compares the South African apartheid government to the death head wearing Nazi in World War II. So death here represents the cutting of life. Death's head, I've already explained it. It refers to the tyranny of a system that cuts down the lives of Black people. You can look at this in a literal as well as a figurative sense. Tyranny. A tyrant is a ruthless or cruel dictator. According to the poet, death is not destroying South Africa, but death-head tyranny. Scythes is to cut something down violently. On the ground is a reference to the land where Group Areas Act excluded people of color. So again here we see that this line refers to the tyranny faced by non-whites. Again, the idea that it is not death that kills them. They are already dead while living because they do not have any freedom. And plots our narrow cells of pain, defeat, and dearth. Plots. This is a pun, as it is a play on words. It could be speaking about a small piece of land, or to plot something, plan something, often something evil against someone else. So to plot is to make a secret plan to destroy someone or something. In this context, the political system makes plans to contain the Black people in narrow cells. These could be prison cells or even graves. Narrow cells. As I've said, it can be jail or graves. The prison cells where prisoners of the apartheid government had been jailed, or the small houses in disadvantaged areas that people of color had been forced to live in as a result of the Group Areas Act. Pain, defeat, that refers to oppression. Dearth, things that are in short supply, for example, food and basic necessities. As you see there, the word scarcity. The poet implies that pain, suffering, and death was deliberately caused by the apartheid government. Better that we should die than we should lie down. Lie down. If a person lies down when attacked or arrested, they show that they are surrendering or submitting. The poet implies that it is better that the people resisting apartheid should choose to die rather than to give up or surrender. There is no full stop after we should lie down. This implies that there is no end to resistance and no surrender. This line also implies that the poet has come to terms with the tragedy of the young doctor's death. She died rather than choosing to lie down or surrender to apartheid, and the poet sees this as better. The poet uses we and therefore identifies with the struggle against apartheid. So it is better to fight and die than to submit to oppressive powers. Submitting is almost worse than death. We see here in this line that the tone is commanding. The tone throughout the poem is defiant. There's anger. There is dismay, frustration, as well as disappointment. The themes. First one criticizes oppression. There's a call to arms that people should get up and start fighting against the apartheid government. There's a theme also of being frustrated and having aborted hopes. These are the resources used to compile this presentation. Thank you so much for watching. If you find this video helpful, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and press the notification button for you to be informed on everything else Grade 12 English.